Namaste. My name is Preeti Chaudhary, and we are here today for an edition of Diversity Dialogue. Today, we will be tackling a very important and hot topic of diversity and culture, two sides of the same coin. Are they or are they not? But to get this conversation kick-started, let us get all the stakeholders into this stream. So, first things first, guests always first. So, here we are, and this is Paolo, our dear friend, all the way from the US. And here we have Mussarat Hussain, all the way from our own country, India. Last but not the least is my co-conspirator and partner in crime, Dr. Rupinder Kaur. So once again, with everybody here, this is Namaste India and hello to the world. This is Diversity Dialogue. Today we are going to be talking about diversity and culture, two sides of the same coin. Why not, and everything else in between. This is in collaboration with my very dear friend, Dr. Rupinder Kaur, who is a leadership coach, a veteran, and a diversity proponent. And we have our dear guest, Paolo, all the way from the US, and we have Hussain Saab from Maruti Suzuki India Limited, all the way from here. The introductions are out of the way, the stage is set, all the entities are here. What stops us from kickstarting this conversation? And for that, let me quickly invite Rupinder to set the context for the topic so that we can get this wonderful discussion started. And a couple of quick reminders for the audience. We do have a live question and answer section at the end, towards the end rather, of this program. So please keep thinking, keep imbibing, keep soaking in everything that our extremely intelligent and been there, done that panelists are going to share, because I'm sure you will have a lot of questions that don't be shy. Please put them in the comment section and we will take them up. So with that, everything is ready. Rupinder, the stage is all yours. Please help us get kick-started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Preeti, for that wonderful setting of the overall context. And I must take this opportunity to also thank my colleagues, Paolo and Hussain, for being kind enough to take out time from their busy schedules to be a part of this discussion and add their richness and experience to the whole dialogue that we are having and continuing to have since the last year or so around diversity and inclusion. So let me start by saying that the last decade has seen a lot of leaders and organizations launch diversity and inclusion initiatives, hoping to make employees of all backgrounds and experiences feel welcome in their industry. I think we failed. The data shows very clearly that we have not moved the needle on the number of either ethnic, racial, gender, LGBTQ, any bucket of diversity that you may want to talk about. The needle movement is not much. And why is that? And what are we missing? Over the years, I have examined this question from both sides. As a leader in charge of building a great diverse workforce, as a woman in a predominantly male industry, whether it's the forces, the Indian Army, which I started my career with, or the corporate sector. Now, both perspectives really came together very clearly to me when I gave a talk at a professional business women's conference, and I'm going to share some of those thoughts with you guys. I realized that diversity and inclusion is an organizational challenge that must be addressed, right? Diversity and inclusion initiatives are necessary to win the war for talent, to find and hire a diverse workforce, and to also ensure fair practices, but they are insufficient. What I really wanted was when I was serving in those organizations where I failed to really find truly inclusive atmospheres was those moments when I feel that I belong to a team, that I matter, and I'm able to be my authentic self. I didn't really want to be seen as a number, a gender, or some kind of, a diversity box, a tick in the box. And I also don't want to be seen only as the role that I perform. For example, a mother, an artist, a leadership coach, so on and so forth. I'm all of that, and I'm more. I want to be able to bring my whole self to work. That is when I have the courage and motivation to speak up and to go beyond my comfort zone. That is fun, and that is where productivity really jumps in. So, during this process of self reflection, I realized that what is missing from this whole diversity, inclusion, equity perspective is the notion of belonging. Whatever background you come from, whatever ethnicity, gender, at the end of the day, you want to feel belonged. Unfortunately, those conversations were not happening in the corporate. But I wanted to start. And I wanted to start those conversations to build a momental change. I know we've just started. We've just started talking about belonging in a very, very big way, and still remains a little bit of an abstract word, if I may say. But the last 3 years that I've been researching around it, I found that there's a huge amount of research around belonging and the power of belonging. Yeah. While the conversation at the corporate level has just started, I think the impact over the years for the organizations which have embraced belonging is huge. In fact, one of the most compelling pieces of research says that we are genetically wired to belong. Our brains are hardwired to motivate us towards connection and belonging because that's how we survive and thrive. In fact, the very recent research in neuroscience has indicated that social needs are managed by same neural networks as primary survival needs as food and water. And findings show that belonging and attachment to a group of co-workers is a better motivator for employees than money. Imagine what a powerful piece of research is that. But one of my favorite pieces of research is from Greg Walton, who's a psychologist at Stanford University. And his research says that mitigating threats to a sense of belonging helps the minorities significantly reduce stress levels, consequently improving physical health, emotional well-being, and performance. So creating a wide sense of belonging can actually create an inclusive culture in the firm and also help the firm gain a competitive advantage. Yeah. So that's my case for belonging in today's conversation. And I'm counting on my esteemed panelists, Paolo, who's done enough and more research work around this domain, to help us understand that how a sense of belonging and inclusiveness can really foster the whole DEI piece that we keep talking about in the corporate. And from Mussarat ji, I would really want to see that how in a manufacturing setup, what advanced, forward-looking, progressive policies around inclusion have been set up, which the others can take inspiration from. And with that note, I'll hand this over back to Preeti to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, my dear friend Rupinder. Absolutely rock solid foundation right there. Everybody that's tuned in today would have a very clear idea of basic diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and how all of these come together to make a thriving and more inclusive culture. On that note, it is time for me to invite the first speaker all the way from the US, but currently in Italy. And we couldn't get any more international than this or any more diverse than this ourselves today, truly, in this dialogue. But my dear friend Paolo, like Rupinder says, please do share with us. You are a D&I entrepreneur. You are the chief scientist at your own company that you very kindly founded. And you've done tons of work around this very important topic. So this whole conversation today, we would like to pick upon your international perspective and your own lived and observed experiences around Diversity and culture, two sides of the same coin. So it is over to you. Warm welcome. And thank you, Paolo.
Thank you, Preeti, and thank you, Rupinder. Really, really grateful to be invited to participate in this conversation. And greetings from Rome. I apologize, there is a lot of noise on the street. Hopefully it will not be too bad. I wanted to start by saying that, first of all, I completely agree with everything that Rupinder said about the importance of belonging. What I found is a little bit challenging sometimes is to define exactly what that means, and more importantly, to be able to measure that. And I want to start by pointing out that those of you who are familiar with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or equity, inclusion, and belonging in the United States, it is uncommon to see someone who looks like me, a white man, and I am cisgender, I'm heterosexual, I'm educated, so I have all of the privilege that one typically associates with people who look like me, and it's very unusual for someone like me to be in this space. And the reason why I entered the space of diversity and inclusion is because of my analytical background. I came into the space after spending more than 20 years using a combination of behavioral science and computer science to understand how the experiences of individual within a particular context, for example, a company, will shape both their experiences and how well the company is performing. And there is a fundamental truth that when you do not belong in an organization, when you're feeling excluded within an organization, you're going to be upset, you're going to be frustrated, and that's going to impact your performance. And if it impacts your performance, it's going to be bad for you because it will be almost like a negative feedback where now you're not performing at your peak and your manager complains about you and you don't get promoted and you don't get raises. But it's also really bad for the company. And I use a simple example that if you imagine that you have a perfect team of people, maybe 5 people, and each one of them is performing at 100%, and as a team they work together perfectly, that's going to be the most performance you can possibly get from the team. If one person now feels that they don't belong and they don't perform at their peak, the entire team will suffer. And if 2 people don't belong, not only will you lose the performance of the individuals, but now you start to get feedback, you start to get ripple effects where the whole team is starting to get frustrated because they're not performing as much as a team. They have to pick up the slack from their teammates, and very soon performance will decline. And the idea there, it has nothing to do with whether you're a woman, LGBTQ, you're a person with disabilities, you're a veteran, but it has to do with the fact that anything that makes you feel as if you don't belong is going to be negative for you, but it will be negative for the entire company. And the converse is that if you find out that there are things in your organization that cause people to be frustrated because of their personal identity, then you're essentially doing damage to your own company. And whatever you can do to make people feel more included and as if they belong better will be better for your company. And I want to make one more comment before I pass it back, and that is there is an interesting phenomenon that we have observed through some research, which is that in some ways we think of inclusion as being, in a sense, the most important thing, because belonging is a sense that you get when people behave well towards you. And I would argue that diversity is not something that you can control. You have to create an environment that fosters diversity, meaning that you have to allow people to feel included. But what's interesting about inclusion is that it's very similar to health. When we were introduced today, I didn't say, or when I introduced myself, I didn't say, hi, I'm Paolo and I'm very healthy. But if you had seen me about maybe 9 months ago, I had an accident. I was riding a mountain bike and I fell down and I broke my shoulder. And then I would have, I had a cast on my shoulder, and you might have seen me and said, oh, what happened? And I said, oh, I have a problem with my health. Inclusion is the same way. We never notice inclusion. We rarely notice belonging, but we notice all the time when we're being excluded. And we notice all the time when we're made to feel that we don't belong. And that turns out is very profound for 2 reasons. One is because if you are the leader of a company and you belong to the majority within a culture, you will always feel included. You always feel as if you belong because people don't make you feel excluded. And that means that you're probably not aware of some of the things that happen in your company. Just as if you're very healthy, you're not aware, you don't understand diseases. And that makes it very dangerous. And I think that's one of the main reasons why so many companies, as they focus only on diversity, they're missing the point, which is that there are people in the organizations that are being made to feel excluded. The good side of that is that we have developed in my company a way of actually measuring inclusion simply by measuring exclusion. In other words, when you go to the doctor, they don't ask you, how healthy are you? They ask you, what are your symptoms? And we can do the same thing. And by asking people, what are the specific things, not just how much do you feel that you belong, you actually want to know what happens to you that makes you feel excluded. And by doing that, you can literally measure inclusion in a way that is very tangible, and it's much more direct than measuring diversity, because diversity takes a very long time to change. Inclusion, if you find out that there is a certain symptom, you can fix it, and you can measure again 2 weeks later or a month later to see if it works. So the punchline here is that even though everybody talks about diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, 99% of the research is focused on diversity only, on representation, on counting people from different backgrounds. And I would urge everybody to start to think about the other letters, not just the D, but also the I and the B and all these other letters, because you need to change the way that people behave in the organization so that individual people feel more included. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it back to Preeti now. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo, for that. And I have a very interesting observation myself, with my background in psychology and the kind of reading that I indulge in. And you're right, Paolo, because behavior is not quantifiable, anytime any measurement or any data is sought out towards DEIB, it is more or less diversity that gets counted, whether it is women, whether it is the number of veterans, whether it is the representation of PWDs or the LGBTQ. But because inclusion and belonging are more mind related, and you cannot really measure those in numbers scientifically, which you have started down the path. So what I'm trying to say here is there's like a misnomer, there's sort of an imbalance wherein we actually want to measure inclusion and belonging, but we end up talking about the numbers of diversity. I mean, somebody needs to find a solution to that, and you started on that, so kudos to you. But let's get back to the topic at hand, and absolutely appreciate all your points right there, years that have gone into researching and then deliberating upon those. So that brings me to our next panelist and Hussain Saab. But before that, quick reminder for the audience again, this is a conversation and a dialogue, which means we talk, you talk, and all of us talk. So let those questions and comments keep coming in. There are some already, but we would like a whole lot more, because the next speaker is going to be talking from a completely different perspective and different space and domain, a combination of. So let's hear it from Hussain Saab. Please help us understand your life journey, your initiation into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, right from manufacturing to all the rest of it. It's over to you, Hussain Saab. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Preeti, and thank you, Rupinder, and good to hear Paolo. I am not an academician like you. I am a pure practitioner. I come from a manufacturing background, and I've been out and out HR guy. See, I started more than 3 decades back, and we could never hear of D&I as a subject, but we could see that women are working in the organization and there is some diversity, there is some inclusion, because I started somewhere with some American company, tech, and we had all those, but nothing was written. But they had, during those time also, way back in 92 I am talking about, they had clear-cut guidelines and policies existing, which was not there when I moved to Indian companies and all. Nothing was written. Yes, we talked about a couple of initiatives and policies, but nothing was written down. But down the line in my journey, what I found that, there were companies where I worked, there was not a single woman working. And, it was, it was not unusual for anyone. It was practically okay. And the fact that when we participated in the best employer survey, this came as a kind of a huge gap. Was a surprise to the senior management that why it should be a gap, and that's how the journey started. But what I am trying to say is that in the last 10-15 years of my career, I have seen this area evolving a lot. And in my current company, Maruti Suzuki, which is the largest automotive in India, and it's a Suzuki company which is operating in India. Thankfully, from very beginning when Maruti started in collaboration with Suzuki, we were naturally inclusive, and I would say intentionally diverse, because we had multinationals coming and working here. And when we started, in fact, India did not have the automotive landscape at all, and we had only the ambassadors and premiers, and we were living on that and very happy. The moment Maruti came, it changed the automotive landscape, and we had no talent available in the country, and hence we had to hire talent left, right, center, from south, from east, from west. So we had the regional diversity. We had many women also coming in, but the challenge was shop floor. In India, in the shop floor, you will not find, especially in manufacturing, ITIs or polytechnic students coming in and working in the shop floor, which is quite contrary. I have seen in the Japanese shop floor, women working on the shop floor in the assembly line. And you have not Japanese working there, but Chinese women, Filipinos, and all working there. But still in India, we are seeing that in the shop floor, the ITI women are not working on the assembly lines or in the areas like, what you call casting, or if you talk about areas like paint shop and all. But yes, in other areas, we have seen women coming in. But in the last 5-10 years, as I'm talking about, I have seen a huge change. When I go to ITIs, when I go to polytechnics, I see a lot of women coming up and from different parts of the country, and they are coming into the shop floor, to the extent that from the top B schools and all, even women MBAs and all, coming and wanting to work in shop floor into the industrial relations, which is supposed to be very tough for women. A woman MBA would prefer to work in training and development in or in design, or some kind of communication areas and all. But today we see that they work in diverse areas, and more engineers, when we go to IITs or any NITs in India, it's like 50-50. And honestly speaking, if you look at what we are doing in terms of creating that diversity and inclusiveness, is that we are hiring more and more GTs and JTs, and we give preference to women employees who should come and work in the factory or in the shop floor. For women employees, we have created so that they are inclusive, they feel belong, they are respected. We have all kind of forums, all kind of things that you can think of, that we have created. We have created a psychologically safe ecosystem. So the moment, in fact, even during pandemic, when we are coming to the factory, we feel more safe inside the company because of the kind of standard operating process that we follow. That kind of environment, psychological environment we have created. Yes, the biggest challenge that we see in industry is that at the entry level, a lot of women folks are coming. But as we grow up in the career, we find that that is where somewhere, because of their pregnancy and all those issues, somewhere there are huge dropouts. And as you move into the leadership, actually it tapers. We see less and less number of women in leadership roles, and compared to, if you do a comparison, it is very minuscule. And I am not surprised. It is not the case with India. We see it globally. This is a phenomenon everywhere in the world. So when I talk about D&I and equity, yes, as far as equity is concerned, as far as career growth, performance management, everything is concerned, everything is treated equal in our company, and I think it should be the way. But it does not happen everywhere. If I go to my ecosystem or my value chain, which is the dealer companies or my vendor companies, the number actually goes down. So they may be, there are some companies like they make wiring harness or electronic work is there, you will find more women employees. But if you go to companies which is into component making or something else, you will not have too many women employees. The problem is that they are not coming into the ITIs. Uh, that's another challenge, that the social scenario in our country is such that women and girls child are not actually encouraged for education now. Last 10-15 years, a lot of work on girl child education is being done. They are coming into the mainstream, but the mindset is very much there. Haryana, where our main plant is, you know of uh, the kind of female fanticide which is happening, and these are challenges in the rural areas, but still people are coming up. And male which comes from those background, they have that mindset of patriarchal society where women are considered below men. So that kind of culture they also bring into the organization when they go to tier 2, tier 3 organization. So that whole cultural change is to happen in the society. And the industries are actually a small replica of society itself. So we try to bring in change within the organization, but it requires a holistic change to bring that bigger change where women are treated equal, treated with respect. We can do it within the organization, but the moment they go out of the factory and when they are going home, you hear of so many incidents happening in between. So the societal change is required. So when we talk about DNI from an organization perspective, theoretically we may do many things right, but creating that champions of change in the organization is what we require. It is everyone's job. It is not HR's job, or it is not company CEO's job to bring that cultural change. I think it's everyone's job to create that culture of DNI, and basically creating that what Rupinder was talking about, the belongingness or the respect, or that kind of trust or faith that we are talking about. So I think it's highly debatable, but I think we are moving in the right direction. But we need to catch up and actually speed up. And this is required not only within the industry, it is required across segment of industries, educational institutions, schools. You talk about all kind of organization. Why only manufacturing? It is something which is to come up in every area, and it is to percolate from top. That's what I feel, and it's everyone's job. So that's what comes to my mind at the moment.
Thank you so much, Hussain Saab. And what stood out for me right there was two words: psychological safety. And I think that is extremely important for any kind of a notion of belonging. Everything else sort of falls in place. But if somebody is feeling safe psychologically, I think they can mold themselves up to any culture, whatever it is, and they can actually thrive in that workplace. So thank you very much for sharing that perspective. And we would be opening up the question and answer section very soon, dear audience. But for now, I have a very interesting comment, and I am going to pull it up for all the three of you. I will start with Paolo. I will move on to Hussain Saab, and then Rupinder, I will move on to you. So then this will act as some food for thought as well, and hopefully we should have more questions. Here is Surinder, very interesting comment, and I'm going to read it out for you. So please just give me 1 second right here. I think we should also see male diversity now. Earlier diversity, now inclusion initiatives. Please check the data on how many male talented candidates are sitting idle because of all these reservations. We should accept the reality. Let's get the international perspective first. Let's see what's happening in the US, what Paolo has seen in Italy, and all the rest of it before we move homeward. So, Paolo, Surinder would like to know, please accept the reality and what are your 2 cents onto the comment that he's posted right there. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, my gut reaction is that I disagree. I think that we are taking as a baseline a system that was inherently biased, that put a lot more men in positions than women, a lot more white people than people who are people of color. And now it feels like something is being taken away. It feels like you're giving a job to a black person and it's taken away from a white person. You're giving a job to a woman that's taken away from a man. I think it's a dangerous way to think about it. I happen to think it's flawed, but I want to try to change the perspective instead of trying to address that specific problem in the following way. One of the reasons why I really like to work on inclusion instead of diversity is that the argument should be very simple. If you have somebody working in your organization, that person should be able to perform their job without being frustrated because they're a man or because they're a woman or because they're black or because they're gay, whatever the case might be. And if you think of it that way, it's not let's make women feel included, let's make LGBTQ feel included, let's make people with disabilities feel included. It's quite literally, let's make everyone feel included. And when you do that, you're taking away, this is one of the things I really don't like about diversity as the primary target that everybody sets, because diversity, there's this notion of a zero-sum game. You're taking something away from men to give it to women. Now, a better way to think about it is, if I can make a better company by having both men and women successfully working in my company, that company will get bigger and I will hire more men and more women. And there will not be the sense of, oh, there are men sitting around not getting jobs, because that's really shouldn't be the case. It should not be happening that way. So again, let's think about inclusion instead of diversity, and let's focus on making the pie bigger for everyone instead of feeling like you're taking something away from somebody.
Thank you, Paolo, for that. Absolutely on the ball with those perspectives right there. Let me move on to Hussain Saab. Hussain ji, what do you have to say about Surinder's very important point right there? Over to you. Thank you.
See, what Paulo said, I completely agree. In fact, there is no reservation. I don't know where this notion came from. There is certain reservation which Government of India does for certain categories of disadvantaged people, fine. But in the private sector or any other sector, there is no written rule in HR that this much percentage of seat is reserved for female. I have not come across in my career at all. We only hire talent basis their capability, basis their competence, and that's how they join. In fact, the only difference is that, you know, people like me, when we go to a campus and we have to select 2 candidates out of 4, and we see that there is a female candidate there, we give preference to a female candidate, but that does not mean that a talented male is excluded. No industry does that, and we cannot compromise on that. And if the talented males are sitting in the home now, it's not because of the female getting the job. It is only because you know, the employment scenario in India and in fact globally is that there has been a job loss. Jobs, government has not been able to create the promised job. Job creation is not happening. So you should not blame job creation to something on the gender or something on diversity. I think it's crazy. I think this thought itself is something very negative. So this is my view completely. Over to you, Preeti.
Thank you so much, Hussain Saab. And absolutely, it's a free country, free world. And I'm sure with 3 people, there will be 3 diverse topics. Rupinder, all of your research, all of your last 20 years of culmination of working in this space, what do you have to say, my dear friend? Over to you.
You know, Preeti, at the first sight of this thought and statement, it makes me smile. And I'll share more than my research, my practical experience. I donned the uniform when I was 22, and I was posted in an area which is heavily infested with terrorists. and I was the second in command of the unit, which had 300 men. I was the only lady officer posted there. Now, did I demand for special privileges? No. Was I treated as somebody who's given a special status in terms of being a woman? No. Did I shy away from my duties and not go out to night patrols? No. Now, I'm not sure why we are even, I think this dialogue is bigger, it's broader, as Paolo said, and of course Hussain Saab mentioned. There are undoubtedly men and women were made differently. So I think just having this question in mind, because women have this reservation, which is why men are suffering, is a very diabolical argument in that sense. I wouldn't say it makes sense. I'm not sure if it is even worth discussion, because if you go back into the historical frame of reference, while our ancient scriptures have always given special status to women, and they've been worshipped, there has, over the years, as we all know, there has been a deterioration in terms of status, power, belongingness, so on and so forth, as far as women is concerned. I think even in the US or the West, which is actually supposed to be leading in terms of equality and equity, at least that's what the perception is. Pretty much 1920s is women got their voting rights. And correct me if I'm wrong, Paul here. So what are we really talking about? A very recent economic report by World Economic Forum and Ernst & Young says that it'll take about 102 years for us to reach any kind of gender parity. So I think the whole idea is, when we are fostering, or when we are, taking this argument of making people feel more inclusive, is primarily not only limited to women and PWD and so on and so forth. It's primarily to say all of us as human beings, are equal in terms of who we are, what we think, what we bring to the table, and we should be respected for what we bring to the table. As simple as that. I think I'll hold my point of view here.
Preeti, can I add some figures here? I have some data which I was going through, which is important to quote here. Can I take 2 minutes? Okay, thanks. See, I was reading the data.
The stage is all yours.
Okay. So I was reading in a report that if you look at Nifty 500 firms, only 15% of the board members are women in 2019. So it means that 85% is board members are men. So where is the question of women stealing men's job? And if you look at among CEOs, less than 5% are women in India. So almost 95% CEOs are male. So it's all open. If you are talented, you grab it. But if I look at another very alarming data, according to the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMIE, between March and April 2020, 26.6% of Indian women moved out of workforce, and the corresponding figure for men stood at 13.4. So in the pandemic, more women actually moved out of job. So that space is vacant. Please go and grab it. So where is the question of men sitting or losing out because of the women? And there are many such figures. In fact, there is another World Bank report regarding female labor force participation. FLFPR in the country has fallen from 30.27 in 1990 to 20.8% in 2019. So there are so many figures which is actually contrary to what the question we have got. So we can, nothing more to say, nothing more to add here. We have figures.
Thank you, Hussain Saab, for that. And I think one of the, just come to you, Paolo. One of the audience also has a very interesting comment right up here. And Praveen says, gender diversity is a very small portion of the overall diversity. Thank you for that, Praveen. And Paolo, my friend, you wanted to add something. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Preeti. And I also want to add something that relates to what Praveen also just said. There is a very interesting psychological problem here, and I want to acknowledge the fact that I don't. I try not to be dismissive of people that make those comments because they're right, right? They're right in the sense that they're given arguments that feel right. But here's another thing that I would like you to think about, and whether it's people with disabilities or LGBTQ or women, if there is a talented man not getting a job, we tend to focus on those who are not men. But how about focusing on the men who are on the job who are not talented? How about focusing on all of the unqualified men that make up the 85% of the leadership of every company who should not be in those positions, but they're not getting fired because they're men? How about the fact that if you have a company and the majority is men, you probably have a lot of very incompetent people. Why are we not firing those people to make more room for talented men and talented women? So it's really a fallacy. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are against diversity for political reasons, for economic reasons, will make up those arguments. Oh, look, a man is losing a job because of a woman. How about a man is losing a job because there are so many incompetent men in positions that they should not be holding? And a person with a disability is losing a job because a person with an ability got a job that they did not deserve because they were recommended by their parents or whatever the case might be. So you need to learn to challenge when people come up with those ideas against diversity. You need to really step back and ask yourself, is this really a valid argument? And in most cases, the answer is no. Somebody wants to make it look like a valid argument. It is not a valid argument because it is not true that the talented man is sitting there because of a woman who got the job. It's just simply wrong. So again, I appreciate that thought, but it's important that we look beyond that and really think about the big picture.
Thank you, Paolo, for that, and absolutely on board, 200% right once again, and I'm in agreement to that. And with that, we are open for questions, and it's over to my dear friend Rupinder because she has one. Rupinder, the stage is all yours, and I will be back in the conversation in just a little bit. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Preeti. And this question is for Paolo. Paolo, and the question says that you mentioned earlier that when people are at the senior leadership level, they do not face the challenge of belongingness, and primarily because they are in a position of authority. So what do you suggest? What is it that they can do at their level to ensure that they get to the pulse of how is belongingness experienced at the lower echelons of the organization?
Thank you, Rupinder. That's a very good question. So this is a bit self-promotional, but what we have found is my company, Aleria, we do these processes that we call an inclusion assessment, where first we educate the leadership on awareness about what inclusion means, what it looks like, why it's so difficult to see when you are privileged yourself, and how it impacts the well-being of a company, not just the people in the company, but the performance of the company. And then we go, once they understand that, we do a series of workshops where we invite every member of the organization in a confidential way to share specific situations that have made them feel excluded. And we then collect all the data. So it's a very natural conversation. It's completely anonymous. We do it through a platform that we developed online, so nobody knows who's writing the comments. There's complete privacy. But then we analyze data and we can go back and show data. And when we do that, it completely opens the eyes of the leadership because they start to see the stories of specific things that happen. For example, a very common complaint that we hear has to do with meetings. In two ways, meetings cause problem. One, it's people who feel that they should be invited to a meeting, but they did not get included in the meeting. But another one is in a meeting, behaviors that tend to be very biased. For example, women who are always asked to be the ones that get the tea and the coffee. They're always the ones that are asked to take notes for everybody. Or maybe sometimes they speak up and people ignore them. And then a man speaks up and everybody says, oh my God, you're so smart. And when you see 15, 20% of your organization complaining about that problem, you realize it's saying, wow, this is really happening in my company. And so that's really what we're doing. And again, it goes back to the fact that asking people, like these surveys that ask people about Do you think this is an inclusive company? Do you have a sense of belonging? That's not very useful. It's as if you went to the doctor and instead of asking you what's wrong with you, they said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you feel today? You know, how is that going to help you, right? So you have to be realistic and you have to face the reality that in every company, there are things that make people feel excluded. And unfortunately, certain groups of people feel more excluded than other groups of people. Our data can reveal that. And when every leader that we've worked with so far, and we've worked with companies that range from very small organizations to global 100 size companies, and every one of them, the leadership has been just blown away because they're like, wow, I had no idea. I had no idea that this was happening. And you get very, very detailed symptoms, just like a disease. You say, oh, I have this symptom, I have to fix it. So that's my recommendation. I'm happy to share some links. There's actually a white paper that we wrote that talks about these different kinds of problems with inclusion, but it's a much more productive way than just looking at the numbers of people in a company. And back to you, Preeti.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you so much for bringing that real context in and sharing some of your research. I'm just going to consolidate what you said along with some of my own learnings in this sphere on how can you make people feel more belonged. I think the simplest way to start is to start showing appreciation for the whole person. Like just go beyond their role and responsibility and use the language of belonging. So for example, this is Preeti, she's part of our research team. The word our really adds the feeling of being on a team. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the neuroscience principles is really to make people feel belonged to a team. Replace the tell with an ask, which is like start with a simple, genuine question. How do you feel today? Or how are you today? And then genuinely listen. Paulo spoke about soliciting input in meetings. And it's really important to make people understand why is someone invited for a meeting, to check for their expectations, ask for their opinions, and follow up with questions so that they truly felt heard. One of the things that I've found in my routine interactions is people ask a question and then they, without even listening to the answer, they pop up with an answer themselves. Let people finish their thought. Do not speak over them. And paying attention, of course, is very, very critical. Making sure that you're fully present with conversations with colleagues. I spoke about respect earlier. I think that's a genuine need even for children. When I speak to my 6-year-old, and if I'm doing something parallelly when she's speaking, you know, she'll either give me a very bad stare, a snore, or she'll outrightly say, "You're not listening, Mama. You're not even concerned." And that's a 6-year-old, right? We're talking about adults here. So just make sure that, you know, that respect, that due respect is given to those people. Thank you, Paulo, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to build on what you said. I'm going to move to the second question from the audience, which is from Mr. Mussarat. As much as we're talking about inclusion and equity and belongingness, Mussarat, we know that there are biases, right? And some of those biases are explicit, which can be seen, heard, and felt. A lot of these biases are also implicit by way of our experiences, our upbringing, our point of view, and so on and so forth. I think I was reading a book called Art of Thinking, and they actually came up with 100 different cognitive biases that all of us suffer from. That's humbling. So in this space of making people feel more belonged, when we, let's say, when we don't even know what our implicit biases are, how can we really guard ourselves? What are some of the best practices that you follow or you've seen in your experience, which help us maybe identify, understand, and challenge some of those biases?
Thanks, Rupinder. In fact, I was reading somewhere that there are 188 kind of biases. I don't know all those biases, but in my experience, I have seen that yes, there are biases that certain categories of job or certain job cannot be done by women, or these jobs cannot be given to women. And then there are certain biases in terms of sales or maybe in terms of shop floor work, and we have a mindset that only these kind of works a woman can do. I mean, these are the work they cannot do. And these are all biases which comes from the society, because when we see that certain thing female is doing, certain thing males are doing, and that has been the tradition. But things are changing. Things are changing a little bit outside. In fact, if thanks to pandemic, uh, uh, I can tell that most of the men can now cook, clean their house, wash clothes, which was supposed to be a female's job. And we have seen it in the recent past only, first lockdown or second lockdown. Uh, so those perceptions are going at home. In the organizations also, I see that those biases are there. For example, a female has gone on a maternity leave, for example, and she comes back after a year or 6 months, whatever it is. Normally when a performance rating is done, some of the biases will be that, oh, she was not there for a year. Why should you grade her well? Why somebody was doing her job, so that person should be rewarded than somebody who has come back after 1 year. Now these are biases which has to go. She has not gone on her own choice. This is something very natural, and companies have to come and support. And these are small examples I'm trying to give. And similarly, regarding job, regarding career, regarding leadership positions, there should not be a bias that female cannot lead, and females have shown today that perception is changing, and we have so many female leaders who have actually shown the way, and they have led organizations and they are leading from front, and including army and air force. We keep on reading how females are coming up in a big way. So this is a cultural change. This is not going to happen overnight, that from tomorrow everything is equal. It doesn't happen like that. Our society is little regressive, I mean, compared to the Western world, where they got evolved much earlier than us. India is still evolving, or the Indian subcontinent, I would say. And things are changing for better, I would say. But I think these are some of the biases I could see in industry, which is coming to my mind upfront. And I see fair change coming into it. In fact, when we adopt ITIs also, for example. So I'm happy that in the initial adoption that we did, and the purpose is very clear, that we adopt for a win-win, because it's a CSR, and maybe some of the trade people can work in our company or in the value chain. But out of way, Maruti has adopted women ITIs, where none of the trades are actually of any use to us. So it's a use to the society. So those kind of openness and removing the bias is something is well demonstrated. So this is what comes to my mind, Rupinder. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much, Senji, for those very, very practical, applicable tips for fostering inclusion and reducing biases. With that, I'm going to pass this over back to Preeti. She has her set of questions and comments, I think, for us to go through.
Thank you to Paolo and Mussarat. Absolutely as well, my dear friend Rupinder. Fantastic points. And the beauty of it all is these are lived and observed experiences. They are not bookish knowledge being regurgitated from some report or something. So that is where the value is. And now, Paolo, I am going to come to you with a very, how shall I say, a question which is important, and you are the right person for this one, because what I want to know is, in the context of culture, you are striding two nations, so US and Italy. So when it comes to the DEIB domain, what are the cultural influences you have seen in the US versus you've seen in Italy, and how are they either different or complementary to each other? What has sort of stood out for you? How a place's geography and culture impacts our behavior to a set subject or topic? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Preeti. I can say, and I've lived in a few other countries as well, and I've traveled a number of parts of the world, but I've never been to India, I must confess. But I found that there are clearly differences in the sense that, for example, in the United States, there is a massive problem with race. And people of African descent in America who were slaves for a number of, for centuries, and still really the treatment of people of color in the United States is something truly astounding in a very negative way. The fact that there's still so many biases and so many things that are happening. And last year, I think that the whole world got a bit of a glimpse with some of the things that happened with the murder of George Floyd and some of the unrest that happened after that. And so from that perspective, it feels superficially as though in Italy, for example, in the workplace, gender is a much bigger issue than race. And for example, I was stunned recently. I picked up a magazine, I was waiting somewhere, and they were talking about the fact that the unemployment rate for women in Italy is 48%, which is just shocking to hear and it feels like it's a little bit backwards. But when you look beyond that, and this again goes back to the difference between diversity and inclusion and culture, I think that every country that I've been to has exactly the same problems, which is that they unfortunately have a tendency to focus on some specific group of people that are typically in the minority and blame them for things. So in Italy, I have to say I've been very saddened to see in the last couple of decades, as there's been a great flux of immigrants that often come from African countries that come into Italy and then go on to the rest of Europe, a very strong backlash towards immigrants that I find really sad. And in fact, right now, that's not even yet an issue in the workplace because most immigrants in Italy do not have permission to work. So you see them begging on the street and you see them being mistreated. And from that perspective, I think, unfortunately, there is a universal truth, which is that we as human beings tend to be distrustful of people who look differently from us. And unfortunately, there are people who are in positions of power, economic power, political power, who know how to take advantage of that, who know how to move people by saying, oh, look, these people are coming to our country and they're taking away our safety, or, oh, women are coming into the workplace and taking away our jobs. And that kind of behavior, unfortunately, is universal. And I do think that focusing on similarities, focusing on making people feel included is the best solution, and really getting away from that sense of you're different from me, you're taking away from me, you're causing problems for me. Because when we focus on differences, that's always going to continue to happen. Thank you. Back to you, Preeti.
Thank you so much for that, and absolutely spot on there, right again, Paolo. And coming over to you, Hussain Saab, what I would like to know from you, starting from the 90s, from when India started opening up, and your own journey into this new domain of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I'm sure you have had to sort of work on reskilling, upskilling, and mindset shifts and changes yourself. In your own words, what has been your journey of self-discovery and thereby organizational discovery to make sure that there are actions and not just words happening into this space in any and every organization that you have been in the last 35 years? Over to you, Hussain Saab. Thank you.
Yeah, see, I told earlier also that in my journey, I have seen, all these things evolving. In fact, way back in early 90s, we were working on a project when I worked for Aisha Group. We were doing, a lot of work around girl child education. Because the concern is that not many women folks are coming into education or higher education, and that is also one of the reasons that you don't see them in employment. So a lot of good initiative by many companies being taken in that, especially the Wipro Foundation and all are doing a lot in terms of girl child education, and many companies have actually taken up this area. Another thing which I noticed is that, yes, there is way back in early 2000 when we had this crisis of AIDS coming up, and I would say the AIDS patient would come and they were actually, discarded, and if you come to know about such patient or such cases in your company, there was a huge discrimination against that person. And many companies in India, with the help of World Health Organization and ILO, adopted policies around the respect and dignity of people who are suffering from AIDS, which was a taboo, social taboo. We had a lot of skits, plays being done in front of factory to educate the workmen. Thankfully, that has subsided. But I remember in central India, when we were setting up one of the tractors plant, see the bias when we were talking about doing regional hiring and all. The industry leaders around Mandideep, when we were setting up one of the Aisha's plant, the notion was that you hire from entire Madhya Pradesh, but don't hire from Rewa. So I said, why not from Rewa? What's wrong with Rewa? They said, no, these people are laggards. They don't work, and they will be trouble creators in your company. See, that's the regional bias. So among various biases, this was one of the kind of very unique bias I came across. And then in my course of journey, in my career, I realized that, in the workforce, blue collared workforce, people shy away from hiring people who are from Kerala or from West Bengal, saying that they have a kind of a militant mindset. They are highly unionized. So these kind of notions have evolved. So, and then when you are doing hiring, people will say hire from Himachal Pradesh. These people are very docile. Hire from Bihar or Jharkhand. They are very hardworking. Or hire from Punjab. They are very, very hardworking. So all kind of notion, I have seen over years, which has evolved in terms of cultural diversity that we have. And we also found that, people from North who are going to work in South, they had to go through a lot of biases and discrimination because they had language barrier, they had all kind of social barriers. So people are not comfortable, in fact, going down south and working because they could feel that there is some bias. And in a country like India, we have also seen that there are a specific bias that emerged in Maharashtra, that from UP, Bihar, people will not come and work here. They are stealing our jobs. So these are some of the things which we saw. And in fact, if much industrialization would have happened, perhaps it would not have been the case. But the industrial growth pace is actually very slow. We have not been able to create too much of employment, but we have seen cross movement which is happening from north to south, south to east, east to west. People are coming and working everywhere. In fact, the best part I have seen is that people, the inter cultural marriages are happening. So people from north are getting married to south, south marrying to east. So that is also bringing kind of a good diversity which was not existing earlier. So that is also seen in the industry also. Within industry, we encourage such kind of relationship. In fact, when I worked in Aisha, if two people get married, one will have to go because the policy said that only one from a family can work here out of 58 kind of relatives. So when Mr. Vikram Lal was chairman and his son Siddharth Lal, who joined the company, Mr. Siddharth Lal stepped down as chairman of the company because he wanted his son to join the company, who later on, of course, he is now the chief executive and all for Enfield and Aisha Group, which is doing wonders. But that's the culture and norm they practice. But in many companies, we encourage that, and both husband and wife are working together in the company, and they are from diverse background. So that's a very good thing we are seeing in the industry. And slowly the percentage of women employees are growing up. But one thing sadly I am not seeing is that for the differently abled, not much is being done in this company. In the entire industrial scenario in the country, except for Tata's, I have seen doing good job. I have seen Lemon Tree hiring differently abled in a large number, couple of other organizations, but the way we should be actually supporting these diverse group, many companies have to come up to really support them, which is not forthcoming. In that is what I have seen, and for the affirmative action that we talk about has to go a long way. Apart from diversity, of course, is happening, but the affirmative action, we have long way to go, and that is what comes to my mind. Over to you, Preeti.
Thank you so much, Hussain Saab. And let me quickly give you some numbers here. So we have 100 million differently able people in this country. Now, if my math is not all that great, so if you sort of put a percentage to that from 1.3 billion, that is still a sizable number. It is, in fact, more than the entire population of quite a few countries in the world. And we still call them from a minority group. So I rest my case over there. But time enough for only these many live questions today. Rupinder, you have a tough job. 67 minutes of this discussion, which you will have to sum up in the next 5 minutes. Before I'm going to trouble the panelists again very quickly for 2 bullet points of takeaways, and then we have to wrap up this session, my dear friend. The onus is on yours. The stage is yours. Give it up. What exactly did Paolo and Hussain Saab talk about? Enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you, Preeti, for really putting me in a spot there. You're asking me to summarize between both of them maybe 65 to 70 years of experience in 5 minutes. I'll try to do justice, but I don't promise any miracles here. So a couple of things, I think, but before I go there, let me just thank you, both of you, for bringing in such a rich perspective of experience and understanding, and also the real challenges that are there in the industries across. So if I have to try and bring together, first of all, what are some of the real issues or challenges in this whole piece of diversity, inclusion, and culture? Pretty much two sides of the same coin. The first would be that organizational culture begins and ends with leadership. So leaders have to really walk the talk. They have to speak favorably of a positive workplace culture, which is inclusive. But if they're not perceived as authentic and not walking the talk and contradicting their words, it can be disastrous in that sense. Because perceived inauthenticity leads to prolonged mistrust and distrust, feeling stakeholders, as Mussarat called, psychologically unsafe and emotionally distressed, which invariably spills over to exclusion rather than being included. So that's, I think, a fundamental thing that we need to be really talking about as leaders, as protagonists, as people who are custodians of culture. What is it that we're saying? What is it that we're doing? And how are we doing that? A couple of things that I could gather from their conversations on what is the way forward if this is the issue. I think Paolo has done enough and more research in terms of making feel people belonged in that arena, and how actually measuring a sense of exclusion may be a more potent indicator than measuring numbers of diversity and inclusion. So all those who are listening to us today may want to check out his site, connect with him on a personal level, and see how his research can actually benefit the larger group out here, and if there are people who are facing those challenges. So that's clearly a big one that has come out from this discussion here. I think the other big one that I could take out from discussion what Mussarat and Paolo said was, really true inclusion starts from home. Mussarat spoke about the importance of societal narratives that are playing, whether it starts from home at the end of the day, and then how smaller increments of feeling included in society actually spills over to organizations. Organizations have, through Peter Senger's work, have been really called an organism, if you really look at it, that living, thriving, changing, growing, or becoming extinct. So that's the larger message, that how can we take or change the societal narrative of inclusion and belongingness and take it and apply it in organizations. And the word that comes to my mind is really responsive accountability. So what I'm trying to say is raising awareness on not being inclusive may not automatically lead to improvement, and accountability should be positioned as a tool of empowerment and effectiveness. It should inspire ownership of personal and professional growth development. In fact, if I can go ahead and say this much, that probably leaders at the helm should be held accountable along with their KPIs on how inclusive are they making their teams feel. And they should be given a numeric goal to chase. One of the organizations that's really progressed very well on this is, which comes to my mind, is the KPMG. At least for India, I know for sure, because I've been interacting with the leadership quite a bit. They've already reached the numbers of 50% women in the workforce. And of course, that's one number that we're talking about. But if you really look at their culture, it's truly, truly inclusive. And all the leaders of the helm are being held accountable on how inclusive do they make their teams feel. So that's the second big one. I think that's clearly coming out. The third and the last one for me would be, really, how do I change the entire narrative from making inclusion a part of my agenda to making inclusion the most important agenda for me as a firm. I will not go into the research which talks about, and there's ample and more research which says how, what percentage of innovative index improves, how profitability improves, and all those indices which give us a clear business case for inclusion. But if I have to give you some quick numbers, by mid-century, there'll be 2 billion elderly and 2 billion young people in the world living and working in the same planet, representing one of the 5 races, 5,000 cultural ethnicities, 63 genders. Now, if that is some number to look at, and 6,000 languages. In such a scenario where today's and tomorrow's highly intersectional workplace and marketplace, inclusive leadership is non-negotiable. I'll rest my case here, and I'm going to give this back to you, Preeti.
Very well said, my dear friend. Absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to come back and add my last 2 bits. But before that, it is always over to the guest first. So, Paolo, over to you for very quick tips rather what not to do and what ought to do when it comes to diversity and culture, 2 sides of the same coin. Over to you. Thank you.
So I would say, first of all, thank you. Great conversations. 2 things that I would encourage people to do. One of them is reject some of the appealing arguments that you hear that try to make you feel bad about diversity. It's very easy to fall prey of these arguments, and you need to step back and say, is it really true that, some of the questions that we heard? But the other thing that I want to encourage you to do is that it's very easy to talk about culture and systemic biases and use as an excuse, but you need to realize that everything that we do as individuals has an impact on people near us. So the first thing that you can do is to look around what you're doing. For example, check your LinkedIn or other social networks and see how many men do you follow, how many women do you follow, how often do you reply or reshare content from a woman versus a man, or content from somebody from an ethnic minority. And those are all things that we can do. And within work, is it possible that maybe you are doing things that are making other people feel excluded? So again, try to resist the temptation to fall prey to these very easy arguments, and do whatever you can as an individual to make sure that the person near you feels more included as a result of your better behavior. Thank you. Back to you, Preeti.
Thank you so much. And absolutely right. Tackle the behavior. Everything else will fall into place. Thank you. Great tip. And I am going to take that on board myself. But let's hear it from Hussain Saab in terms of a couple of quick tips from you as well, please. Thank you.
Yeah, see, I was reading that diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice, And again, there was something very good about it, that diversity is a mix. and inclusion is making the mix work. So one example we give after every training is that, diversity is like a sugar, you can say, and if you put sugar in water, uh, it will not work. So inclusion is when you stir the sugar and make it sweet. So inclusion is actually making the mix work. So this is the simplest example which comes to my mind. Just talking will not help. We have to actually imbibe those inclusiveness that we talk about. Uh, just theory will not work. Uh, we have to ensure that that mix is created, and this is everyone's job. It is not HR's job or a CEO's job. It is everyone's job, and this is how we can create a inclusive culture and belongingness. That is what the whole idea about this entire DNI is concerned. So that's all. Over to you, Preeti.
Thank you very much. And from my end, I would like to leave the audience with two things. In today's day and time, we are in the best possible scenario or situations that we could ever be. We are at the cusp of a multi-generation workforce. So we have the millennials into the workforce, we have the previous generation into the workforce, we just have the Gen Z getting into the workforce. So that is something in terms of opening up our minds, in terms of our flexibility, in terms of our own learning and growth, whether we are 18 or whether we are 80, the absolute perfect time to be at. Number two, let's also think about intersectionality. And here is one example. So, I'm a woman, yes, that takes care of the gender diversity. What if I'm a woman veteran? That takes care of gender diversity, and I'm also from the veteran pillar of the equity, inclusion, and belonging. What if I'm a differently abled woman veteran? The point I'm trying to make to everybody here, my dear friends, is intersectionality is something as well we need to start thinking and talking about, because then the scope widens entirely and a whole new vista and horizon opens up. But that is for another time. Today, time enough just for that. This was Diversity Dialogue. We were talking about diversity and culture, two sides of the same coin, with our two very dear guests all the way from the US by way of Rome, Paolo, and our very own Hussain Saab, my partner in crime, Dr. Rupinder Kaur, and your lovely, and even if I say so myself, friendly host, Preeti Chaudhary. Until the next time, do take good care. Jai Hind. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.